Welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because even with all the fear and uncertainty out there right now, I truly believe this Bitcoin pullback is going to act as the perfect rocket fuel for the new highs that come afterwards. And this is because we've watched the same pattern play out 5 times already this cycle. Bitcoin establishes a low, takes out that low and then rallies. Bitcoin establishes a low, takes out that low and rallies. Same thing in January of 2024. Same thing in August of 2024, and same thing even as recently as April of this year. And then here we are once again with established lows. And the most likely outcome by far is that we take out those lows in a quick capitulation event, and then Bitcoin rallies once everybody gets caught wrong-footed after panic selling. And the reason why these patterns have been so hard to navigate, even though we've watched it play out over and over again, is because there's always a terrifying narrative that makes investors panic sell during that capitulation event. In March of 2023, it was Silicon Valley Bank going under and everybody being convinced it was 2008 all over again and that the banking system was going to collapse. In September of 2023, the SEC went after Coinbase and Binance, and everybody was convinced this industry was done for. In January of 2024, the grayscale unlock started happening when the ETFs went live, and everybody was convinced the grayscale was going to crush the market by selling hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. In August of 2024, we had the Japanese yen carry trade implosion, and everybody was convinced the global world order was ending as we knew it. And even as recently as April 2025, which wasn't even that long ago, everybody was convinced that global trade was done for, the global economy was going to collapse, and we were going to enter the next Great Depression because of tariffs. So I have no idea what the new narrative will be. Is it going to be the tariff pause ending and then more tariff drama? Is it going to be escalations in the Middle East and everybody calling for World War III again? It's hard to know what the narrative is going to be in advance, but there's always a terrifying narrative that coincides with these quick capitulation events because the narrative is what causes investors to throw in the towel and sell. Now, does this mean the market can never go down and narratives never matter? And even if we get World War III, Bitcoin is still going to 200,000? Definitely not. It's more appreciating and understanding the fact that we can never know exactly what's going to happen, and trying to predict it and sell everything so you can buy back in lower almost never works because there's no perfect way to predict what's going to happen with these major global events. And we're already seeing incredibly bearish sentiment from retail. Sentiment has this awesome indicator which looks at the number of bullish and bearish comments on social media. And in orange here, they have the ratio of positive to negative comments, and it is now at the lowest level we've seen since April of this year, except price is now just over 30% higher from the last time sentiment was this low. We're also seeing this reflected in the Bitcoin futures premium. Right now, Bitcoin derivatives traders are very cautious and not betting on a lot of upside now that we see the premium falling to a 3-month low. And we've also seen a reset in the fear and greed index. We were in extreme fear in April. We went all the way to greed quite recently, and now we're back in neutral. And I wouldn't be surprised if we dipped into fear briefly once again before our next rally higher to shake out all of the weak hands that are on the edge of selling their entire position and giving up. This is why this rough sketch here for the early cycle scenario is still my base case. I don't think Bitcoin needs to drop a ton before our next rally higher. I do think we already saw a deep enough correction at the beginning of this year in Q1 and Q2. And after having a huge correction, Bitcoin tends to maybe have some smaller ones in between. And that's what I think is happening here. And I think that after one brief capitulation, we'll have the fuel needed to recover and enter price discovery once again. I don't think it's likely we're going to enter months of consolidation here in the summer. It is a possibility I'm watching and I'm open to, but it's definitely not my base case because we've essentially been at these prices since November of last year, and I don't think we need much more chop and consolidation before Bitcoin can continue its rally higher. And of course, we'll definitely continue to monitor it, but the pain cycle scenario where the cycle is already over and 112K was the top is something I believe is still quite unlikely as of right now. based on current price structure. And this is why it really helps having a portfolio that's prepared for different outcomes. As of right now, I'd love to see another dip buying opportunity before we enter price discovery so I can deploy some cash. But I'd still be happy with higher prices if that dip never comes because I still have plenty of upside exposure. And that approach that I've taken this cycle has helped me a ton with navigating this market and keeping my emotions in check, whether the market gets incredibly fearful or incredibly euphoric. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about my portfolio automation system, how I automate my profit taking and accumulation, or mental models I use to navigate this market, you can check out the Crypto Enjoyers program in the video description. But as of right now, it's pretty clear that after this false breakout, Bitcoin wants to consolidate and test some lower prices before our next move higher. And this is why Monday's free weekly report was called Healthy Reset, because whether you look at price action consolidating, or you look at market sentiment cooling off and returning to neutral, or you look at Bitcoin futures and the amount of risk taking that investors are taking right now, everything is pointing to this being a healthy reset and cool off after the 40% rally we saw in April and May. Another reason why I believe this is just a healthy reset is because the fundamentals still look great for Bitcoin. The Bitcoin ETFs are still seeing inflows, and we are back on a 8 to 9 day inflow streak. Even with all of the tensions in the Middle East, you can see that very clearly in the data here, just a ton of inflows and very minimal outflows as more and more supply gets taken off the market. And if we take a look at some on-chain data, here we have the short-term holder MVRV ratio, and this just looks at the amount of unrealized gains that short-term holders are sitting on and gives us an idea if there could be some serious profit taking happening soon. You can see that every single local top this cycle has happened at this orange line here, where short-term holders sit on so much profit, they start locking some of that profit in and selling. But right now we are way below that profit taking local top level. And if anything, it looks like Bitcoin could have quite a bit more upside before we see short-term holders taking profit more aggressively and causing a local top. So maybe we end up seeing that brief pullback, Bitcoin rallies to 120 to 130,000, and then that puts us back in that orange region for the MVRV for short-term holders. And then we see aggressive profit taking and a local top from that point onwards. And then we're gonna have to assess whether that's the top for the cycle or we continue this trend of local tops consolidation and actually enter an extended cycle, but that is just way too far out to predict as of right now. So I'm focusing a lot more on what's going to happen over the next 3 to 6 months. We're also still seeing great improvements with regulation. Ohio's House passed a bill to legally insulate various crypto activities such as mining and staking from taxes. And we also have the Arizona Senate voting to revive the Bitcoin Reserve Bill that did not get passed earlier this year, and perhaps it will be passed on the second attempt. We also still have global liquidity rising and giving Bitcoin a great backdrop to go higher until about August of this year based on the current global liquidity index data that we have. The dollar index is still consolidating. I still believe it's going to put in that bounce, and that could result in a correction for Bitcoin later this year because it has gone down in a straight line and looks overdue for some mean reversion. But as of right now, it is just going sideways. We're not expecting any Fed rate cuts until September of this year. Quantitative tightening is still happening, but it has slowed down a ton. The labor market is still slowly weakening, but hasn't fallen apart quite yet. Inflation is still headed in the right direction, but hasn't reached the Fed's target quite yet. But the most important thing is that growth is still positive, and we're not seeing any signs of a technical recession at this point in time. And risk assets seem to know this because Bitcoin and the S&P 500 have been performing quite well over the past few weeks. And the future still looks quite bright for Bitcoin and this asset class as a whole. Polymarket is now saying the US stablecoin bill has roughly a 90% chance of getting approved. I believe it got approved by the House last week or 2 weeks ago. It just got approved by the Senate. So it looks quite likely that this bill is going to get passed. We also have a 90% chance that a lot of these altcoin ETFs are going to happen. These ETFs don't necessarily mean that all of these altcoins are going to be seeing investor demand, but for the ones that do have users and do have real use cases, I wouldn't be surprised if these ETFs were supportive for price, especially because the SEC is likely going to allow staking for these ETFs, which should be very great for assets like Ethereum because investors have been passing on those staking rewards by holding the Ethereum ETFs. And if they could get a 2%, 3%, or even 4% yield on their Ethereum holdings in those ETFs, I think it could really help inflows. For now, Ethereum is still really struggling to get back above 2.8K. That is the important level and the line in the sand that Ethereum has to reclaim. I wouldn't be surprised if Bitcoin dragged it a bit lower and then it had the strength on the reattempt to get above that level and finally break higher, especially because Bitcoin has been above 100,000 for a while now. A rotation from Bitcoin to Ethereum wouldn't surprise me, and we're seeing that right now on the Ethereum Bitcoin pair. Nice spike up, and it's been consolidating sideways in what looks like a bull flag before its next move higher. As for Solana, still trying to put in a higher low on the USD pair. Maybe the 100-week moving average is where that happens. The Bitcoin pair doesn't look great. It's still barely holding above its previous low, but it's getting closer and closer to that level. For now, Solana and Ethereum are still underperforming Bitcoin by quite a bit, but if we do end up seeing that quick capitulation and price discovery recovery, I wouldn't be surprised if Solana and Ethereum outperformed Bitcoin on that next rally higher. But as we look forward, the federal government is still running huge deficits, and that trend seems to be worsening year after year. And exponential debt growth means exponential money supply growth, which should be a strong tailwind for our risk assets like the S&P 500 and fixed supply risk assets like Bitcoin. But as always, let me know what you expect. Thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.